Schedule is a strict Monday to Friday schedule, and so there's no way to figure out how I could be in class 100% of the time and not have conflicts with my meetings and my other classes over at the college. And so what we worked out was a hybrid schedule where I would teach the class 2 days a week in person, and 1 day a week we would do some sort of online activity and discussion. And I was just getting into blended learning and online learning at that point in 2015. So some of these experiences I'll sort of bring to bear in our conversation today, because, you know, like the rest of you right now, like I really got into online education out of necessity. It made it possible to do some of the things that I was going to do professionally, and then Notre Dame, of course, went to some fully online programs that I teach in. So I do quite a bit of online teaching, and I enjoy it a great deal. So that's me in a nutshell. And I guess what we should start with is sort of asking ourselves how we found ourselves in this situation, where we have to quickly learn so much about online education. And the fact is, we all got pushed out of the nest in March, right? And we flapped like crazy so that we wouldn't hit the ground. And now we've recovered from that terrifying experience, I hope. And we don't want to repeat that this fall. We don't want to feel that sort of chaos. And I think that it's been particularly difficult because this isn't the way that we were taught for the most part, right? I mean, I'm a child of the 1970s and 80s, which you will note from my slides dated cultural reference there to Talking Heads, right? But technology in the classroom then was film strips that beeped to prompt the teacher to change slides. I remember my driver's ed teacher at Seekonk High School rolling the TV into the classroom after school, the TV cart with the VCR on it so we could watch gory videos about the dangers of drinking and driving. And I guess my first experience with technology or remote learning was my senior year in high school. Our English teacher had foot surgery, and talk about a committed lady. She didn't want to just take 2 months off. She actually recorded videotaped lessons on English literature with her leg raised up in her bed, and she had her husband drop off the VCR tapes each morning. This was high technology circa 1986. So, I tell my kids about this, and they think it's hilarious that was high tech back in the day. Online teaching, let's face it, is a little scary. If you haven't done it before as a student, I think it's difficult because teaching really requires empathy, right? I mean, how much of your planning involves imagining what the class activity is going to be like for your students, and how can you envision that if you've never really been in their shoes? And that's sort of what online teaching is like. And, I was one of the first professors to be teaching fully online courses at Notre Dame. And the way that I described it to my curious colleagues in the School of Ed was that it was like being a first-year teacher all over again. And that was a little unsettling at that point, I think I'd been teaching in the high school and college classroom for 27 or 28 years. And now I felt like a rookie all over again. And there were tricks that I had to learn, tricks of the trade that you really can only get through trial and error. So I think if we kind of accept that we're sort of starting anew, that can be daunting, but it also can be really exciting. And I think we're stuck with the situation as it is. Like, here we all are, and we have varying degrees of teaching experience. We have varying degrees of online experience and technological proficiency. And one thing we should all be ready for, and probably even be certain of, is that how we start the school year is not how we're going to end it, right? And whatever our teaching format is at our particular schools. And I think things may change radically in September or October or in the second quarter, the second semester, who knows? So this makes planning a little extra difficult because we're struggling to envision what the learning environment is going to look like. And I also know that it's hard to think about putting in piles of work for online instruction, which may be temporary. I don't know any teachers that are hoping that this lasts for a long time, and that we're out of the classroom and out of daily contact with our students. And almost all the teachers I know love the classroom and being around their students in person. Now, by February or March, do we always feel that way? Well, that's why God gives us snow days, right? But on top of all this dislocation and all this uncertainty, for many teachers, the spring was exhausting, right? I mean, if we're being honest, it's been hard to motivate to getting the work done for the start of the year, maybe because it was so tumultuous and exhausting in the spring. And that's if you haven't had sickness or loss during the pandemic, or maybe even just a house full of kids who need attention and no escape, no restorative getaway to the beach or even to a bar, right? So these are all realities that we're facing. So what do we do? I mean, how do we avoid flapping like crazy angry birds trying not to hit the ground? How do we fly? How do we even hope to soar in 2020 and 2021? So what I'm hoping today is that this webinar can give you a little something to help you feel ready. I don't have all the answers, but I can share some of my experiences in the online and in the blended hybrid environments. I still love face-to-face teaching just as much as I did when I started teaching in 1992. But I've really grown over the last few years to love online teaching, and I honestly can say that I feel like it has made me a better teacher overall, and I hope that you'll embrace that opportunity as well. So here's the plan for today. I have 4 things that I want to talk to you about, and then we'll finish up with a little discussion and a little Q&A. Hold on a second. I just paused my screen share there. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's get that back up. Okay, so if I just go back one slide, we're going to do 4 things. We're going to talk about how we might play to our strengths. I'm going to use some coaching terminology here. My 20 years of coaching soccer comes out from time to time. There are things that we can use as approaches, general approaches, that I think will help us build community and feel confident and comfortable in the classroom, because in the online classroom, because that's really the most important thing for our students and for us. We all have to be comfortable. So if I go back to my earlier question, what do we do? Well, I guess the answer is that first we need to focus on the reasons that you're doing this to begin with, right? Which is this sense of connection and community with your students. We want to find new ways or ways to employ new approaches that maybe you've always wanted to try. And now we have the opportunity. And the third thing I would say is that we want to expel the idea that this is a temporary arrangement. Okay, this could lead you to becoming a more effective teacher and making you do things in new ways. And it might even extend your lifespan as a teacher who understands the generation you're teaching, because they are into digital and online technology in ways that can be hard to relate to for older generations. And so this is an opportunity to connect with our students in a new way as well. And let's not kid ourselves that the students that keep coming to us year after year are going to be less digitally inclined or connected to the online world. So there's your pregame pep talk from Coach Moore. Okay, so when I was coaching soccer all those years, 20 years at Calvert Hall, and I coached club soccer. I must have coached 1,000 soccer games in my life, and I always saw it as a simple problem: how to minimize our team's weaknesses and how to play to our strengths. So I guess that's my first question: is what is the greatest strength that we can play to? What is the greatest strength of the Lasallian school? Well, to me, the Lasallian values of relationships, of accessibility, of caring, of community, of humanity, these are all things that are what make Lasallian schools great. And I would ask, I have somebody out there that needs to mute their microphone if you don't mind. Okay, thanks. When I started teaching online at Notre Dame, my greatest fear was that as we went to fully online classes, we weren't going to be able to sustain the sense of community. because the school sisters do an excellent job, just like the Christian brothers do, in creating that having that value on relationship and creating that sense of community. So I think for us, the way that we do that, that's where it all has to start. Before we talk about content, before we talk about how we're going to to educate our students academically and intellectually, we've got to touch their hearts, right? We've got to reach them in a way that is meaningful. So I think that it's important for us to let them know that we wish we could be there in person, right? But that we're also determined to build relationships, and that we are committed to making this a positive experience, both personally and educationally. We have a lot of things to complain about right now, right? But I think that that's really counterproductive with our students. We have to sort of keep that, we got to lock that down a little bit and let them know that, yep, we have frustrations just like you do as students, but we're determined to do this together and to continue to build that sense of relationship and community, because that's the great power that we have. And I think it's important for us to be human, right? I mean, your students enjoy your personality and your sense of humor, and don't turn into a robot just because you're sending out assignments or doing videos or talking to them through a screen. I mean, be who you are. They miss you, or they may at some point. But I one of the things that I like to do with my online classes is, particularly I started doing this in March. I didn't do this before with my graduate students because they had signed up to take online classes, but people that were thrust into an online environment that they weren't expecting, like the students that I had in the spring, and then the summer course that I taught at Notre Dame, which was supposed to be a face-to-face PhD discussion class. So that was unsettling to people, that all of a sudden we were going to have to be on Zoom rather than sitting in a circle in class. The first thing I did with them is I asked them to name a positive thing about online learning, about the change in format. And I offered my own too, and what I offered to them was that I saw this really as a chance to break out of the same old routine. And I think sometimes younger students will connect to this even more than college kids or graduate students will. School is the same every year. It feels like it's the same every year. This is an opportunity to get out of that. If that feels like drudgery to kids, well, here's a chance to do something new and exciting. So I think it's good to get them talking about something positive. Find something that they like about the new world, because again, there are a lot of things that we can complain about. So, and I told you I was going to sneak a little philosophy in. Well, here it comes. So beware. This all relates to a modern philosopher by the name of Nell Noddings. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Nell Noddings' work, but in the 80s, she wrote a landmark piece of educational philosophy called Caring, which she followed up in 1993 with a book called The Challenge to Care in Schools. My favorite book title of Dr. Noddings is from 2003. She wrote a text called Happiness and Education. So what she's dedicated her life to is the idea that teaching is an act of caring, that we show that we care and every day, and that we always remember that we are teaching content, but more importantly, we are modeling how to be in the world, how to relate to others, and how to communicate. And you are doing that online every bit as much as you are when you're standing in the front of a classroom, or when you're walking around a room with your students, or you're in the hallway or the cafeteria or wherever. So we can't forget that we are still modeling how to be online, how to be in the world and how to relate. So, and Dr. Noddings goes on to say that we have a moral responsibility to do this. We have a moral responsibility to care for one another in society. And this is true in school more than just about anywhere else. So how we relate to them and to show them that it's okay to struggle in a pandemic. The more that we do this, the more they'll accept their own difficulties. And I think the more they'll accept us as authentic, as people who really care about them and want them to learn, but also want them to thrive as whole people. And I mean, let's face it, students will not learn from a teacher that they believe doesn't care about them, right? And we show it in so many ways that have now been taken away from us. Like I mentioned before, I mean, how much of your day in a normal classroom, situation, in a normal work day at school, how much of your work is your best work happens with a conversation in the hallway, or after class, or in the parking lot. How much do you communicate with your body language in a classroom? These things have, we've lost these things. And so we've got to find other ways to replace them, because these are the meaningful moments that happen in between the times when we're doing the nuts and bolts of our job, right? So one of the things that I think is important in an online format that we don't do in person too often is to try to get a little bit of evaluative feedback from students. After a week, after a month, like, invite them to say, to ask them these questions. What is working best? What bores you about the way that we're doing these online classes? What's interesting to you? What would you like more of? What would you like less of? And really encourage them to be honest. And I think that it will present you as an adaptable teacher, a caring teacher, someone that cares about the learning community and the learning environment. And their feedback may be really insightful. It likely will be very insightful as to the way you're doing things. And otherwise you're flying blind, right? Like, you think you're teaching, you're not sure whether they're learning. And we use tests and assessments and things to try to figure that out. But wouldn't it be better to hear them, qualitatively tell us, look, this is what works for me. This is what I don't like. This is what I do like. This is what I wish we had a little more of. And this is an opportunity to build community in a way that we don't normally do when we have a traditional classroom setup. So that's the first thing. In the way that we play to our strengths, I think is crucial. Okay, the second thing that I think we should focus on is that it's time to give them the ball. One of the horrible frustrations I had as a young coach and teacher, as a soccer coach, I always wanted to be able to call timeout. I really was jealous of basketball coaches who, when things were going the wrong way, they could kill momentum by just calling timeout and getting their players over to talk to them. And then I realized after a while that really coaching soccer was like a higher level of coaching, because once the whistle blew and they rolled the ball out, like, I had one chance at halftime to talk to them all, and the rest of it was up to them. So I had to put them in position at practice to know how to do it on their own, to solve the problems for themselves, because we couldn't wait for halftime or the end of the game. The post-mortem in the locker room wasn't going to change the outcome of the game. So I think that for us in the classroom, it's the same thing. It's time for us a little bit to let go and to give them the ball. And I think that there's a second great strength of Lasallian schools that we could play to, and that is the commitment to rigor, right, and to excellence, right? That we have a commitment to making education not just something that touches hearts, but also reaches their minds and develops them and expects high standards from our students. That's always been the greatest pleasure of my time teaching at Calvert Hall. Just the way that the students respond when we raise the bar for them, and I think that's a great strength of Lasallian schools, that we have high expectations. So when I said in my pep talk earlier that we have the opportunity maybe to teach in ways that we always want to, here's what I mean. First of all, again, to go back to a philosopher, John Dewey is the father of progressive education from 100 years ago, and in his lab school in Chicago, he saw a whole different way of sort of remaking American society and democracy in the classroom, and it was based on the idea, an old idea, an Aristotelian idea, that the students have to do it for themselves, that we are there to guide them, but we have to make them produce. We have to make them produce material and content, and that in fact the best way to do that is not to leave individuals on an island, but to get them to collaborate and get them to work together. That it's good for students as human beings. It's good for them as learners. It's crucial to them right now to feel connected with one another, and instead of just doing that through texts and FaceTime and what have you, their academic work should also be seen as more collaborative than maybe we've dared to do in the past. Look, ultimately in their jobs one day, they're going to be collaborating. And so, and it doesn't matter what field they go into, they are going to have to work on teams. They're going to have to work together. And so I think that there's great value and there's great rigor in making the students teach a concept or teach one another or you a trick to how they mastered something. And by creating that form, creating those opportunities, those assignments where they can share their expertise or sometimes their lack of expertise, right? It lets them know that you value their contributions and that they have something of value that they can add to, and they can do it together. It does not have to be teacher to student and back and forth like a tennis match, which brings me to my favorite philosophy. Who really changed my way of thinking about teaching when I went to the university level, and then I brought it back to the high school when I came back to teach at Calvert Hall. And that is the Brazilian philosopher Paulo Freire, who you may not have heard of, but if you haven't, my goodness, he's a life changer for my students, my graduate students. Freire says, we need to learn alongside our students. That's the real power in the classroom. He describes the old traditional method, what he calls the banking model of education, where the teacher comes into the room and makes deposits of knowledge into the empty vessels, the empty bank accounts that sit in front of him or her. And this idea of depositing information, it's not pleasant for anyone. That instead we should be engaging our students in problem solving activities. We should be letting their questions guide the way. That banking method is far too passive, right? If you've been in Zoom meetings for hours on end, you know what passive learning, what passive listening does to the soul, right? So this I think is an important idea for us to bring to bear in online learning. This is an opportunity to, instead of being, what we call the sage on the stage, we should be the guide on the side. We should be there working with them, learning with them. We're certainly going to learn from them in terms of technology. They're going to have good suggestions for us about ways that we can do things in technological terms, and different platforms and apps and things that we might be able to incorporate in education, because they know that stuff better than we do in a lot of cases. But we also can guide them to knowledge in a way that is not a strict delivery method. And I think that most teachers have been moving away from that in their face-to-face encounters in traditional classrooms. But I think this is an opportunity for us to really take that to another level. I know that in Baltimore, at least, we talk in public schools and in the private schools. I do a lot of professional development with public schools, and I have a lot of public school teachers and administrators in my graduate courses. And we seem to talk about writing all the time, like getting our students to do more writing. And yet so many teachers get into the classroom and they have their 40 minutes or their 60 minutes or whatever time they have, and they just don't get around to doing enough writing activities. We talk a lot about metacognitive thinking, getting our students to think about the way that they are arriving at solutions, or the way that they're thinking about their science lab, or the way that they're thinking about history or poetry or any subject. This is an opportunity to get them to do more of that thinking about their own thinking, to do a little bit more writing. And so we should see this as an opportunity, because there's going to be a lot of learning that goes on outside of the classroom. And honestly, I think this is great for kids from middle school forward, because what it's doing is it's training them for the skill that they get thrown into when they get to college. When they come to the realization that, oh, I'm in college now and I'm in class for 150 minutes a week, 3 50-minute classes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or 275s on a Tuesday, Thursday, something like that. I'm only in class for a couple hours a week, and my professors are expecting me to put in 6, 8, 10, 12 hours outside of the classroom. Whereas, when they're in high school and middle school, they spend most of their time in school, and then they get their homework done as fast as they can. So getting them to flip that switch and see that the time that they spend outside of class individually, but also collaboratively, can really help prepare them for the job that they're going to have one day. And in the near term, for those that are going to college, it's going to prepare them for that style of learning and working. And I think that's really important. So I'm speaking globally. I'm speaking in broad strokes, but I can give you like one simple example of something that I actually started doing this when I started teaching hybrid courses. And I do this with my high school students. I do this with my undergrads. I do this with just about everybody. And this is the easiest thing there is, because if we're going to do discussion forums, yep, it can be a lot of work for teachers. It can be a lot of work to be creating new discussion questions and all this. Well, you can always fall back on these two because they're golden, believe me. The first question is simply, what did you take away from class today? What what was your impression of what was important? And then give them the opportunity to ask any other questions or make any other comments that they might not have been able to jump in on. One of the challenges we're going to have in Zoom world or Microsoft Teams or whatever platform you might be using, and if you're hybrid, where you've got some students in the room and a percentage of students at home, as a lot of schools are going to start the year that way, it's hard to conduct a class discussion when some people are here and some people are there. It's hard to conduct a class discussion when you can't see everybody's faces on the tiles on the screen. And so that's why I always encourage that chat room on the side in real time, but also have them answer these questions afterwards. Give them 24 hours. Or if your class meets every day, tell them they've got to do that in the 15 minutes after class, or they've got to do it after all of their Zoom sessions are over for a given day. And these are surprisingly easy questions to get conversation going. And once they get comfortable with this, and they don't have to write a page, they can write a paragraph, they can write a couple of sentences, but they've got to say something, and they've got to ask some sort of question. Then once they get comfortable with that, you can ask them to respond to one another, and that gets a little bit of conversation and community going on outside of the classroom, and that's I think that's really important. So this is that's a really easy one, and that's a couple questions you can always fall back on if you run short of time in terms of preparing discussion questions. I tend to use these almost all semester long with my classes, and then I intersperse maybe more specific questions if we're having a specific conversation about race or about religion or about a particular issue that I feel like, okay, today we need to hear more about this, or we didn't get to finish this conversation, so I can ask a pointed question. But I have these questions are always sitting there in my back pocket ready to roll, and they're great starters, because ultimately I would say that if you're going to do this, you've got to be willing to allow yourself to take a load off, right? Take a load off of yourself in producing content. So when I say give them the ball, let's get them to produce something. Get them to produce something interpretive or creative. Try to encourage humor, as long as it's clean, right? Creative submissions, multimedia submissions. I mean, this generation spends a massive amount of their leisure time watching YouTube videos, TikTok, tweeting, posting, making memes, making videos. Like, let's take advantage of this. Let's take advantage of their willingness and their capability to produce digital content. Obviously, we'll give them parameters on what's acceptable and what isn't, but they love doing this. They do this on their own. So let's see if we can channel that a little bit. And I would say that if you have them doing discussion forums, you have them turning in assignments, if you have them sending emails that are in written form, they're going to get tired of typing too, just like we do. So let them record some short audio and video responses, right? And when you get tired of emailing, you get tired of posting feedback, send an audio file. My students love that, right? They tell me that it feels like I'm in the room with them, and that's what we're trying to create more of, isn't it? Right? We're trying to make them feel like we're with them. And when I send a 75 or 90-second audio file of essay feedback or a comment on something, a shorter assignment that they submitted, maybe a video that they turned in, I'll tell them what I liked, what I didn't like, or I'd like them to improve on. You can do that quickly. You do that in 45 seconds. I find that I don't procrastinate grading as much either. when I know that I'm going to be talking to them rather than typing up comments. And look, in some cases that is impossible, right? Some will need editorial sort of sentence level corrections on a writing assignment. Well, you can still attach those. Make your broad comments an audio file. or all of your positive comments, and then say, all right, the suggestions and critiques, I embedded those in the document that I've attached. And you're creating actually less work for yourself, because you can speak about someone's essay a lot faster than you can type up comments. And so I think that's really helpful, and I get a lot of good feedback from my students on that. They love that, and it's surprising how fast you can get through a set of assignments when you're just recording. It's as simple as clicking on the microphone on your computer. And I use a Windows machine, but I'm sure Macs are even easier, because I used to be a Mac person. And when you get done recording, it'll give you the option to email it right away. And so it's really a simple way of getting that done. And again, it builds community, because they feel like you're there in the room with them, and we wish we could be a little bit more. So look for that as an opportunity. Okay, so we've talked about relationships, we've talked about rigor and excellence and demanding more of our students by giving them the ball. The third thing I would say is that we need to get an early lead. Like I said, I coached probably 1,000 soccer games in my career, and I can tell you that of all the games we lost, we probably fell behind. And all the games that we won, we probably got the early lead. It's really important in soccer, and it's really important in the classroom too. I think getting off to a good start makes all the difference. So what are you going to do next week, or in 2 weeks, or whenever it is that you get started? Well, do not start with the syllabus. Okay. Here I am, college professor, saying do not start with the syllabus. You have to. It's not even good in a face-to-face classroom, but it's even worse on Zoom or online. You have to connect with them. You have to get their interest. Then you can show them what the class will be like. Then you can get into the course content, or beyond the course content, into the requirements, etc. But most importantly, and more importantly than ever, we have to generate interest. So here's what I do. Okay, I go into my humanities class and I start the very first day. I never talk about the syllabus on the first day, and I'm not going to do it this year either. I have a 10-minute video that I've already filmed, and I used it last spring to send out to the parents of the class, because people had some questions about what we were doing in class. So I did a 10-minute review of everything that we cover. And so I get the kids in, I'm going to have them not in physically, but I'm going to have them in Zoom, and I'm going to talk to them about how we're going to learn about philosophy, and we're going to learn about architecture of all sorts and in all times. We're going to see some of the greatest paintings in Western civilization, things that maybe you've heard of, but you've never seen before. And they come from all different periods, all different places. And we're going to talk about the background and the history and the technique. And we're going to examine a lot of different types of art forms. So beyond painting, wait a minute, excuse me just a second. I'm going to just go to my next slide here. We're going to do sculpture. And that goes back, it's in the great tradition of Greek sculpture. We're going to talk about stuff in the Baroque period and the Renaissance, and we're even going to talk about some crazy modern sculpture, things that might not seem like art, different media that come to play. And really, like, I'm enticing them, I'm teasing them with the weirdness and wonder of modern art that we're not going to get to until the end of the course, but it gets them thinking about where the heck we might be going. And I'm not afraid to let them know that we're going to have some fun with this too. Okay, we're going to look at some stuff, and we're going to look at some parodies of things, and we're going to enjoy that. And one of the things I'm going to do this year, I think, since we're going to be fully online, is we're going to have a little contest to see who can come up with the funniest memes. Okay, who can find the funniest memes, who can create the funniest memes, and I'm not afraid to take on the pandemic. Like, let's be real. Let's not pretend that this isn't happening. Let's find some funny memes that make sense in the current culture. And this is going to be one of our first writing assignments. Is I'm going to ask the students, like, why is that funny? Okay, ask any comedian. Like, you can really suck all the life out of a joke by making them explain the joke, right? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to try to suck the life out of that meme. But we're gonna have some fun. I'm gonna find out what they know about Vincent van Gogh, and be an excuse for a little little writing exercise too. So starting, getting out of the gate is important to that first impression, right? We think about that in social circumstances, like the first impression that you make with people that you meet is important. Well, it's true with your students too. One of the great thrills of teaching that I haven't lost after 30 years is that first day in the classroom, right? That nervous energy that you have before you walk in. Even if you're a confident, seasoned teacher, meeting new people, right? And making that first impression is important. Well, guess what? It's way more important in an online format because it's going to be harder for them initially to figure out who you are. So let's have some fun right off the bat and have a few laughs, because that breaks the ice and get them going. Jim Lang is a professor from Assumption College, and he writes columns in the Chronicle of Higher Education. And in an article from last year in January, before the pandemic really was, a year before the pandemic hit, he was writing about the importance of the first day in a face-to-face format. And I went back and read his article a few weeks ago, and I thought I really got to talk about this in my webinar in August, because it's even more true, I think, in an online format than it is in a face-to-face class. And what he's saying about the first day of class in a college at the start of the semester is absolutely true for a high school, a middle school, or elementary school as well. And he writes this. I'll quote from his article. Professor Lang writes, "Whichever approach you use on the first day, the most important element is basic. Set aside a chunk of class time on that first day for students to engage in cognitive work of some kind. Are you teaching a writing class? Have them write on the first day. Is it a problem-solving course? Have them work on a problem. Is it a discussion-based class? Get them talking." Point is that if you want your students to be actively engaged in learning throughout the semester, actively engage them in learning on the first day. I ripped through some of those slides. That was just a little taste, a little potpourri of what I do. It's a 57 slide presentation I do with my humanities students. I showed you, I don't know, about 10 or 12. And I stop from time to time and say, what do you think about this? Do you like this? When do you think this is from? What period do you think this is from? Just some simple questions just to get them going and let them know it's okay to think that urinal that's turned upside down is a ridiculous piece of art. Maybe isn't even art at all. Or talk to them about buildings, about architecture, about sculpture. Just get them thinking about things that they don't normally get to talk about, because then that gets them comfortable in the things that I want them to do in class anyway, which is to be able to speak critically and intelligently about art. So I think that Professor Lang, his advice is well taken, that you want to get them going a little bit on that first day. Okay. All right. So let me just slip over here for 1 second. There we go. Okay. So what have we talked about so far? Well, we've talked about now let's get down to the difference between the strategy and the actual tactics, right? What plays are we going to run? We didn't get to do that in soccer too much. Again, I kind of wish I had been a basketball coach and I could have designed some brilliant plays, right? That sometimes work. But we've got to have some tips and tricks. We've got to have some tactics to go along with this broad idea of how we want to build community. So what have we talked about so far? Well, we've talked about collaborative learning as a way of building community. Some simple online discussion forums to get them talking to you and with each other, getting some critical feedback from them about what they like, what they don't like, what they would like to see more of or less of. Get them to produce content and to do it in ways that are not always the traditional ways, and have an in-class chat room. Let them talk while class is going on, and then you can go back and collect those, or if you do breakout rooms, which is a great way of creating small group environments in a Zoom session. While they're in those breakout rooms, you can be reading those chat comments on the side, so when they come out of the rooms, you can be ready to respond to things that they might be asking. Okay. So other things, just a couple other ideas before we I open it up and we have some conversation. One other technique that we can do, I think, to build community is instead of just being live face-to-face, introduce yourself with a video, or use videos for instruction. And I'm not going to give you whole series of you know, items of advice. I'll just lead you to this guy right here, Dr. Michael Wesch, who is a professor at Kansas State University. He's all over YouTube. He was the winner about 10 years ago of the Professor of the Year in the United States from the Carnegie Foundation. And he's won some awards from a variety of different organizations. He's won awards from National Geographic. He's won awards from Wired Magazine. I can tell you his videos are short and they are super entertaining. And if you just search this right here, make super simple videos for teaching online, or you just search his name, that's why I put it on the slide, so you'd be able to write it down. You can learn a lot. I mean, I've watched 3 or 4 of his videos, and there's some really important things that he communicates, because I think a lot of people are uncomfortable on camera, and that's what this video begins with. This video that I cited here, it starts with the discomfort of being on screen and how we make this harder than it has to be. Like, just take out your iPhone, get some good lighting, and go. And you know, keep it as simple as possible. You don't have to have perfect audio. You don't have to have perfect video. You need to have pretty good lighting. Okay. You can do it outdoors. You can do it indoors. I've done videos on my kayak for my students. I've done videos of me giving myself a haircut in pandemic. Okay, with you know, a pair of scissors and my electric razor. Like, you can do all kinds of weird, funny things, and keep them short, keep them snappy, and it really makes the kids see that, oh, you're as crazy as they are. And what Wesch says is, this isn't about performance. If you're worried about performance, then you're worried about getting every word right, about scripting it, about filming it perfectly. You know, like, just connect with the kids, communicate your passion, communicate your energy. And one of the best tips that I got from watching his videos is the idea that when you are on screen, you have to give 125% of yourself. I've been watching the convention the last couple of nights. I don't know if any of you have. Some of the politicians that are speaking understand the idea of giving 125% of themselves on screen. Others only give the 100%. And so consequently, it seems like about 80%. It's a little flat. It's a little dull. It's a little boring. Well, that's going to be you if you don't get in front of the camera and be energetic. If you don't communicate the passion that you have for teaching, the energy that you have, how much you love being with your students and teaching your content, you got to give that to them. You know, you got to, you know, what I tell my students, you know, students that my high school students and my college students that are interested in going into teaching, I said, you got to walk into the classroom every day like your hair's on fire. It's even more true on screen than it is in person. Okay. I mean, 6 or 7 cups of coffee isn't good for you in the long term, but teach that way. Teach like you had 6 or 7 cups of coffee. Yeah. Your students will appreciate it, and you won't put them to sleep. Okay, so let me just share one other thing. You know, you don't have to make the videos. You know, and Wesch is the first to say that. He says, go out and find some content. There are lots of good videos out there. So here's an assignment from the very beginning of the pandemic, one of the first weeks that we couldn't be in school. I took an assignment, and again, my humanities class had an advantage because we were already blended. So some of the things that you'll see in this assignment, they already knew how to do because we'd been doing these. But we were in the Baroque period, and we were learning about architecture. So I found a couple of really short videos, like 5 or 6 minute videos about the Chateau of Versailles. So I said, watch this video, made sure to mention that it was very short. I said, you're only required to watch the first one, but the videos that appear beneath as you scroll down are also interesting, because there's a whole series of videos about the Chateau. So if somebody wanted to go a little further into depth, go for it, okay? And then, you know, I try to entice them, try to sell it a little bit. Say, hey, please enjoy the British narrator's use of syllabic stress on the word chateau, not to mention his pronunciation of privacy. Okay, I know that I did, because I'm experiencing quarantine-itis at this point. So I give them the link, and I give them a YouTube link of the same thing, so you can watch it in French if you want to. And then I ask them to, to post a comment, do a response. They've already been, you know, I'd already trained them on sort of how to do that. And early on, when you do discussion forums, you do online submissions, make it low stakes, right? You know, give them a little better grade than they probably deserve to begin with, and then, you know, make it, you know, be more demanding as you move along. Like, as they get used to the new format of submitting assignments, then we're going to increase the rigor. We're going to make things harder for them. And so then, I ask them to do this. And at the very bottom, you'll notice that I'm asking them to have fun with this, right? Like when you respond to your peers, go ahead and be funny. But funny isn't enough. Like be funny, but also be meaningful, okay? Give us something substantive. So now this challenges them to be teenagers, okay? This challenges them to go out and do what they do every day together with one another, which is to needle each other a little bit and have some fun. So so that's just an example of a pretty simple assignment. I didn't have to make the video. I just had to find it and then write up something that was going to try to entice them a little bit into the assignment. Okay. Two more things, and then we'll talk a little bit. First is the poet Mary Oliver famously wrote that attention is the beginning of devotion, and I think that a little bit of one-on-one time is really necessary with students in an online format. And is it time consuming? Yep, it is. But that's also a lot of your workday when you're in a normal classroom, normal school environment. So it might be a phone call. It might be a little extra Zoom time after class. You might schedule Zoom office hours. Your school might even require you to do that with appointments. You can make them required. You can make them optional. My college students that are in online classes, I call every one of them at the beginning of the course. It's time consuming, but it's a 10-minute call. And I can tell you that it is by far the number one thing that my online students rave about in the course evaluations. The thing that they remember the most was that, and they always say it's something like this: Dr. Moore took the time to call me. Dr. Moore cared enough to call and talk to me for 10 minutes to see if I had any concerns, fears, whatever at the beginning of the course. And that's in an online format that's asynchronous, right? Where I just want to hear their voice. I want them to hear my voice. I do introductory videos so they can see me. I send pictures of me traveling around the world and things like that. Remember when we used to travel around the world? So things like that, like it's a little thing, it's time well spent. And you don't have to get, maybe you're teaching 150 students, like you're not going to do that all at once. But maybe you can tell that you've got 10 or 15 or 20 students that might be struggling a little bit. You can give 10 minutes, can't you? You would in school. You would during a free period or after school or before school or during your lunch period. I think that we need to be open to doing that. And I really am a huge proponent of that because the feedback I've gotten from my students has been wonderful on that. Okay, last thing. You've probably heard of the fishbowl discussion, which is a pretty simple format of creating community conversation, because creating discussion is the most important or the most powerful way of creating community with your students in class. And a lot of teachers feel like it's easier to do in person than it is online, and maybe that's true, but you can use the fishbowl, which is a tried and true method of denying people conversation in order to make them more eager to be part of a conversation. Basically, I'm joking, but this is basically how it works. You set up, you send some possible discussion questions for something that they were reading or something they were preparing for class. Then before class starts, you pre-assign groups. You don't have to if you don't want to. You can do breakout rooms. You can randomly do it on the spot, but they know what the questions might be in advance. And now you're going to put 4 or 5 of them on the spot right now. They're going in the fishbowl. And everyone else that's not in that discussion group is watching and listening, and they're taking notes. And, we say like, oh yeah, you're being judged by your peers for how much you know or what your ideas are. And what we tell the students that are on the outside of the fishbowl is they need to take notes and focus on 3 things. The points that their peers make that they think are particularly interesting or insightful. These are not going to be yes or no questions. These are going to be critical thinking types of questions to get discussion going. Second, they might take notes on any points that were made that they would like to have clarified, or they would like to hear that person expand on them a little bit. And then third, anything that they might want to challenge. So it's a great way of getting the conversation going, because in a Zoom session, so often people just sit there and are listening and not really engaging, and they're not taking notes. So it's a way of getting some people really intensely involved in the discussion and everyone else to sort of be on the outside of the fishbowl looking in, and then thinking about them in very specific ways. What was insightful here or interesting? What do I want to hear a little bit more about, or what do I disagree with and I want to challenge? And then those students on the outside are put on the spot. Like, hey, what did you write down? What were your comments? What are your notes? And so that gets everybody going. So these are just a couple of practical ideas for trying to create community and create that environment. But I think hopefully some of the more general and broad things that we've talked about today will be meaningful and useful to you. So let's I won't put you in the fishbowl, but since we'll just have a big discussion all together here. So let me just come back so you can we can look at each other here a little bit, and I guess I'll just open things up. Is there anything that people would like to talk about, or any questions they might have? Don't forget to unmute yourself if you do. Just jump right in.
Andy, I have a question.
Sure.
So I teach classes that are going to be predominantly discussion based. And so how do you sort of get the ball rolling? It's a little easier with adults, but I've been on lots of Zoom meetings, even with adults, where we're all just kind of staring at each other's squares. And so how do you avoid that awkwardness, or that like 3 people talk at the same time, where like when you're in a classroom, it's easier to kind of keep that ball rolling? How do you do that when you're online? And then I'm also intrigued by what you said about using the chat on the side. And I'd like to be able to do that, but also knowing that with high school students, that could like derail everything too. So just if you can comment on that, please, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, so I'll kind of go in reverse order here. The derailing of the conversation is, that's just as tricky as being in a classroom and, seeing the people that are talking to each other, whispering to each other. We used to pass notes to each other back in the day. Now they text each other, I guess, while they're sitting in the classroom. So yeah, that challenge is definitely there. And that really comes down to something I didn't really have time to talk about today, but setting the rules, like what we call Zoom etiquette, right? Like you've got to have Zoom etiquette. We're going to use this chat and it needs to be productive. And if it isn't productive, then we're going to turn these into writing assignments. I mean, you can really you can threaten them with more work at all times. But yeah, I think that is something to be realistically concerned about. And I think that if you insist on public chat comments only rather than private chats, and again, that comes down to getting familiar with whatever your system is, whether it's Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever, because there are a lot of ways to spy on the chat if you are hosting the meeting. And so figuring those things out before you get in the classroom, because the kids will figure out where the cracks in the system are, won't they? So that's one thing. The other thing about discussion and sort of that passivity and the awkwardness of people talking at the same time, that was a real fear for me this summer. Because I was teaching my PhD class, which is it's a philosophy class. All we do is discuss. I mean, the bulk of the class is discussion based. And so what I found with them was, and adults, I think, are just as every bit as bad as kids might be in terms of, not being awkward in terms of like getting into the conversation or talking over each other. You have like the raise your hand button and things like that. I found with my students, the easiest thing to do was just to have them raise their hand like that. I mean, that's just as easy to see than to see, the little icon. And then people put the icon up there and then they leave the icon up there because they forgot to take the icon down. Like they're not going to forget to put their hand back down. So, we can go back to the old, manual methods of getting someone's attention. So I think that's an important thing to do, is say, hey, we are going to raise hands, and just, let's just get, make that sign so we know. And then you've got to be the moderator. You've got to say, okay, Mary, you're up. Okay, Christine, your turn. Or Angie, I'm going to get around to you. Hold on just one second. So there's interrupting that goes on. The thing that's harder, I think, is in face-to-face conversation. You can read body language, or you can hear like the intake of air when someone's about to say something, and you do lose that in person. And so I think a little bit more of the signaling is important. And the last thing I would say is, if you can't get the discussion going, and I definitely fought that in June, because what happened was I was supposed to be teaching 2 sections of that PhD course. And there were going to be about 11 people in each class, which would have been really nice. But then when we went online, they pushed it all into one one section, because colleges love cost cutting. Professors be damned, right? Okay, so now I've got 21 people in a Zoom session, and they don't know each other. Whereas before they were in cohorts together, where they'd been in multiple classes together, and so sort of that socialization where they got comfortable with each other, that was already built in. So I fought that at the beginning, and what I discovered was that as early as I could get them in breakout rooms, the better the conversation would be. And when I put them into breakout rooms, I would ask a question. I would usually do a little bit of introduction, a little lecture at the beginning, like 10 minutes or something, and then say, okay, we're going to go into breakout rooms. And I would randomly assign them, and I would make sure that I never had more than 4 or 5 people in a breakout room together. Ideally 3 or 4. But again, if you've got 28, 30 students in your class, that's a little bit hard. And then what I would do is I'd ask them the question, I'd send them into their breakout rooms, and then I would type the question, because you can broadcast it, so that they're looking at the question. So nobody's coming back out of the breakout room saying, what were we supposed to be talking about, right? And so they've got that question in front of them. And then, one of the things that I actually prefer about leading small group discussions on Zoom as opposed to face-to-face is you close the breakout room and they get a timer that's counting down from 60 seconds, that the room's going to close in 60 seconds. So they know, okay, we're all getting kicked out and coming back to class in 60 seconds. That's always a challenge in a classroom, right? Is that you get those small group conversations going, and then it's like you're trying to, wrestle them back into the conversation, and you lose a couple of minutes that way. And then you just randomly choose somebody from the group to report on what happened in their breakout room. You start doing that, everybody's going to be paying attention in the breakout rooms. And then you don't have to make it super high pressure where somebody that's a little more introverted is going to panic because they have to be the reporter for their room. Say, all right, Sarah, it's your job to tell us what happened in your conversation in your breakout room. Okay. And then say, okay, when she gets done, if anybody else in that group has something that they think they'd like to add, or Sarah forgot to cover, go right ahead and jump in. So the pressure is off, but it's still on at the same time. So those would be my suggestion. And I think the earlier you do that in a class session, those little breakout rooms, and they can be short, 3, 4, 5 minutes, the easier it is to get conversation going, because you get them collaborating with one another and talking, and then they'll come back to the group, and it really gets a little momentum going. All right. Yes, Angie, go ahead.
Question.
See how effectively the hand raising thing works?
I did the same thing with my students too. I felt like the simpler, the better. Like, yeah. And honestly, even before I asked them, that's what they did all spring. They were more likely, so it's fine.
Yep.
I'm curious as to your thoughts. I feel like there's a real balance here between, especially when we're using Zoom, which at least everyone I know on here who's at the same school we are mostly.
Yep.
There's a balance between like Zoom etiquette and like cameras on and, this is what we need to do and how you participate and all that, and the lived reality that not every student lives in a safe or equitable home or feels comfortable showing their background, or is it multitasking, taking care of siblings, whatever.
Right.
And so can you talk a little bit about the balance of meeting students where they are and acknowledging that reality and caring about that reality, right? And so not making Zoom participation some of the be all end all, while also, again, like setting out some standards to get people to rise to that occasion.
That's a great question, Angie. And I would go back to what I was speaking about earlier about being a human being as a teacher, right? Like, you have to show your humanity. You have to show them that we're all struggling in this. And don't think that there aren't going to be times when you're teaching on Zoom and something happens. I've got two dogs in my house.
I have 3 kids, so
okay, right.
Something happens every time I teach.
Every time, right? And look, and we see this on TV, right? I mean, if you remember last year, the guy that was being interviewed on BBC, I think, and his kid came running into the room, and then his wife came in, like grabbed the kid, like took him out of the room and slammed the door, and here he's being like interviewed on a news show. I mean, like this is just this real, like, we have to laugh about that. I mean, I'm surprised my dog didn't jump up behind me. She loves to sit on the back of this couch because she thinks she's a dog. And it happens in probably 30% of my Zoom sessions. And it's like, it's hilarious, right? So like, go with it, right? But it's also, you also have to understand it. And look, I saw this with adult learners every bit as much as I did with my high school students in the spring. Like, stuff happens, right? Like their kids are sick, or their internet went down, or in some cases it's cases where the kids don't want to talk about it because it might be like their electricity got shut off, or their parents are fighting. I mean, like, stuff happens to kids, and it's okay to say to kids, look, if something's happening and you're uncomfortable, you should be muted to begin with, right? So we don't have all the feedback, but it's okay to shut your video off for a minute. And if you have to leave class, then you send me a message like that. Like, I mean, I tell that to all my students, all my older students, like, when we're in class, if you've got a sick child at home and you came to class, like, keep your phone on. Just when the phone rings, leave the room, just get up and, like, tell me, look, I got to leave my phone on tonight. I'll go out in the hall if I get a message that I have to deal with. I've had it happen to me, as the professor in the room, where, like, my kids, I knew, like, they might need me during class. So I just was honest and said to my students, look, I might get interrupted in class tonight. I'll step outside for 5 minutes. I'm just letting you know in advance. So I think if we give the kids a little bit of that advanced leeway to let them know, like, don't abuse this. Don't try to take advantage of me as a teacher, but I'm with you. And I understand that, like, things are happening, and, like, we don't all have good space to work. And there are going to be things that happen at home sometimes during our classes, and it's not the end of the world if you have to step out. If I feel like you're doing it all the time, or I feel like you're doing it to take advantage of my flexibility, well, then we're going to talk. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Hey, Andy, Mary's got a question in the chat room.
Yes. Yes. Is there a way they can only chat with you? Okay. So, Mary, I'm going to do it right now. Okay. Did you get my message?
Right. What I meant was, I believe that there's a way that you can set up Zoom so that you are allowing the students to only chat directly to the instructor, the person who set up the Zoom, and not have them have, like right now it's set up so I can do it private to someone else.
Right.
So in terms of, as Christine was saying, in terms of what to do in the high school, if you're concerned that they're going to get too busy talking about, private things
Right.
and not focus in the class, I believe you can set it up ahead of time that way.
And it's not just high school kids. I've been in some faculty assemblies on campus in the last few months where faculty members have been bipping around little private messages to one another. I may or may not have been involved in that. Okay, but in any case, some things you just don't ever outgrow, right? When you set up a Zoom meeting, when you are the host of the meeting, you have a whole menu of options of settings that you can establish in terms of who's allowed to share screens, how the chat is going to work out. So you just have to go in and kind of play around with that, because that's on the Zoom site with your account, where you set up your hosted meetings. Okay. And also, I should point out that when you do that, when you set up, if you're the one setting up your meetings, you can set those up to repeat so that you don't have to send out, codes over and over again. My middle daughter is a junior in college, who is supposed to be studying abroad in France right now. So she is in great misery being at home taking her classes. But 2 of her 4 professors this semester, because they've started classes already, have set up 15 Zoom meetings for a class that meets at the same time every week. So if you get your settings right, Mary, and you set it to meet weekly or daily or whatever it is, you only have to do it once, and then they get the code that's all they need. And you've set up the meeting parameters, the rules of how the chat works and who can share screen and all that sort of stuff. So again, it's like that before school starts kind of preparation that you have to do, like get all your settings the way that you want them, and it'll reduce a lot of those headaches later on.
So I'm going to wrap this up. Andy, is there an email real quick that they can contact you at?
Yeah, you know what? Let me type it on a slide and I'll share my screen. So
Okay.
If everybody just bears with me for 1 second, I probably should have thought about that in advance. So here, I'll just put it on this slide and I'll share my screen. I'll give you my Notre Dame address because I check my Calvert Hall address pretty regularly, but I have to check my Notre Dame address every day. So I would be glad to answer any questions you have. If you want to send me an email because you want to talk on the phone, that's cool too. I'm always happy to do that. So don't hesitate to ask. Let me just get back in here. And let me see here.
You might be able to put it in the chat if everybody opens their
Yeah,
chat.
actually, I could do that, but now I've typed it on the slide. So let me just put it up. Okay, can you see it there?
Yeah.
It's right under my name there. So it's pretty simple. First initial, last name, and then it's NDM for Notre Dame of Maryland .edu. So please send me an email. And again, like I'd be happy to talk on the phone or just exchange some emails if you want to bounce some ideas off of me. You know, we had a faculty meeting at Calvert Hall. I was telling Alan before our session started today. We had a faculty meeting at Calvert Hall on Friday, and I don't attend a lot of the faculty meetings, but I figured this one was really going to be important because it was going to be about how we were going to do our online learning, and so I just sent out an email to all the faculty at Calvert Hall, and I said, email me if you have any questions, any issues, anything you want to talk about with online education. We can talk on the phone. We can do a one-on-one Zoom. I can just trade emails with you, and I've gotten some response, and I love to talk about this stuff, as you can probably tell since I've dragged you past 4 o'clock. So please don't hesitate. I'm glad to help my fellow Lasallian educators any way that I can. So please just ask.
So Andy, we appreciate it. Just a reminder, we have 2 more webinars in this series on Tuesday and Wednesday at the same time. And information about the webinars are on the DINA website. And just my best wishes to you all navigating all of this in the classrooms and the halls and whatever other responsibilities you have. So we appreciate it. Wish you well. Have a great Friday and weekend.
Okay.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, everybody. It was great to meet all of you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
You.